So we're here. We're just a couple weeks away from this what in English is called the mountain seat ceremony. And so I'd heard from Colin that you've had a few different talks from people about significance of some of the ceremonies that will happen and how they relate to the monastic tradition uh, and and so hopefully you're starting to get some kind of a sense of the importance of what's going to transpire. Tonight, I'd like to take a piece of the overall picture and focus on it, and I plan to talk for maybe 20 minutes or so, and then leave some time for questions. I was a school teacher for a long time, and so I do have the bad habit of just opening my mouth and never shutting it. So I'm gonna try to keep my eye on the clock to make sure that we do have plenty of time for some questions. So when we were performing these ceremonies at Budai Temple a number of years ago, it was really clear to me that the ceremonies were important for me as an individual. It was time for me to take another kind of leadership or receive another kind of leadership would be the right way to say it. And and I was encouraged by, all of my colleagues and my Dharma siblings in the US and in Japan that it was really time for this to happen. And so I headed into it with that in mind. But as we started to prepare, what I began to realize is that what was much more important than anything about my own personal trajectory as a leader or a priest was that these ceremonies were about where the temple had arrived. And I played a big part in that, continue to play a big part in that. But the center of gravity was not so much on me as an individual, but that the temple was ready to have an abbot, and that the office of the abbot, the only way to establish that office was to officially install an abbot. That's how the line of abbots that would care for a temple gets started. And so I'd like to talk about that tonight a bit, the office of the abbot, why it's important in a temple, and some different ways that we might think about it. In these ceremonies, which people in English oftentimes refer to as the mountain seat ceremonies, I have no idea where that got started, mountain seat. But I guess people like the image of the Buddha sitting on Vulture Peak or someplace like that and giving a teaching. Because actually, in these ceremonies, the teacher traditionally stands, isn't seated, and the ceremonies in Japanese are referred to as ascending the mountain, and then the second is opening the hall. And then usually there's a Dharma combat ceremony, which is related to the Ongo that's being held, and then some way to care for and celebrate the community that is there together. But the two that are really the installation ceremonies, the ascending the mountain and opening the hall, um, are are what establishes the office of the abbot. Of course, Cologne in this case will be the one who is going through those ceremonies, but at the same time that he becomes the abbot of Sensoji, that then that office begins. When we talk about ascending the mountain, it's interesting. I'm assuming that Sensoji is not literally on a mountain. Is that the case? Yeah, I mean, you're on an island, right? There must be some mountains around there somewhere. But it's not like at least on the side. But that would have been the case for many or even most temples and in antiquity, that they were usually built outside of the hubs of power long ago, and then they made their way in, and they would be on some kind of a mountain. So the habit of referring to a temple as a mountain may be related to that. All temples have a mountain name as well as their temple name. What's your mountain name at Sensoji?
Nyohozan.
Oh, of course. Yes. Nyoho. The so you have this mountain name as well as your temple name. That's true for all Soto Zen temples. At our temple, we have a little teeny temple, not quite as little as yours, but still little. We have a very long name. Most temples have two characters for their mountain name and two characters for their temple name, but we have four in each, which is a little bit rare. So we are the Eugene Kidenzan Shobo Butsugenji. Very long, but little temple. Did people watch Aladdin? Did you ever see the cartoon Aladdin? When my kids were little, we watched that all the time, where he's like ultimate cosmic power, little tiny living space. That's our motto here at Buddha Eye. So anyway, the mountain name is really is important to have the name, but also that it refers to this mountain. That those mountains where the temples were built were sacred mountains. In a way, all mountains are sacred, but they were particular mountains, and they held a meaning for people. In the sutras, the Buddha teaches from Vulture Peak. And inside of the temple, mostly now in the West, we don't have these kind of formal altars. Most temples don't. But the altar is referred to as the Mount Sumeru altar. So it is a depiction of Mount Sumeru. And that is where the teachings are flowing from. And so the Shumidan, or the central um, uh, altar, is a mountain. And it's from that mountain which the Dharma flows. That's where the abbot stands when they're giving their first teachings as the abbot. In the traditional, like in Dogen's time, for example, in the Dharma hall, there was no Buddha on the altar of the Dharma hall. There was a Buddha hall where there was a Buddha on the altar, and then the Dharma hall, it was just a platform. And Dogen and then the successive abbots would haul themselves up onto the altar, and that's where they would teach from. Perhaps that's where the term seat comes from. So, this ascending the mountain ceremony and the opening the hall, that's honoring Koun and is also initiating this line of successive abbots, is important because it's recognizing that Dharma has to be cared for. It's not just something which we can treat nonchalantly or willy-nilly. And hopefully, the person who's becoming the abbot really knows that deeply. And in Koun's case, I at least suspect that is the case. So when you initiate that line of people that are going to care for the temple, you're asking Koun to perform that now. You're also asking Koun to see that there will be a next person who cares for the temple. And that is a great burden which an abbot takes on. They're agreeing to care for the temple and this generation, but they're also saying, I will do my best to see that this temple will be cared for by another abbot, another lineage holder. I think oftentimes we're unaware of how lucky we are, how lucky you all are to be in a situation where you have someone who holds the lineage that is willing to care for your temple. You know, many people can practice, they can practice hard, they can even have a great insight, they can harmonize their body and mind and their life and their livelihood, and wonderful examples in the Dharma, and they can even teach. But to transmit the Dharma, it requires that someone has received the Dharma, and that they can stand on that altar as a conduit of something that really goes beyond themselves. And it's that thing that goes beyond ourselves which is being cared for. When I was in monastic training at Daijoji Monastery, very fortunate to have a display of bonsai come through the temple. So it was a very large temple, and we would have some different kinds of activities that were related to the surrounding city of Kanazawa, which is a very artsy town. If you ever go to Japan, visit Kanazawa. It's really remarkable place. And so there's a kind of bonsai, I don't know what you would call it. Group is too light of a word, like bonsai masters that come together to care for these bonsai. And so there was this exhibition one weekend at the temple, and the bonsai were just miraculous. I mean, you couldn't believe how beautiful they were. But there was one, it was a maple, I believe, but it wasn't that kind of typical Japanese type layered Japanese maple. It was round. The the whole what you call that, the branch structure was round, but incredibly detailed, coming back to this very old trunk. And it was a very old tree, you could tell that. And it was almost demonic. I don't mean in a negative way. I mean that way like there's some shamanic power in this tree that if you saw it would just rivet you. And so the couple days that it was there, I went back to look at this tree again and again because there was something so alive about this tree. All of them were beautiful, but this one was particularly um, captivating. And while I was looking at the tree, I noticed the little plaque to the side, which I assumed was going to be just some description of what the tree was. And I was interested, oh, what is this tree? And so I was looking at the plaque and trying to decipher the characters. And then I realized it was a list of names. And it was a list of the names of the master bonsai, the bonsai masters who had cared for this tree over generations. And there's maybe 6 or 7 names. I don't know how old the tree was, but it was pretty old. And being in that environment, training with many seniors, particularly the staff of the temple and the abbot of the temple, it was like something opened up inside of me. I got it. It was like, oh, these guys are serving the Dharma. They're serving the mountain. They're serving the conduit of the Dharma. And to do that, you have to you have to put a lot of things aside, and then you have to be willing to receive that responsibility. And those names, you could tell, like if the third guy down was like, I want to go to Las Vegas, and maybe I won't water the tree, and the thing dies, you're in big trouble, right? It's a big responsibility to be in that line. And that's what's happening in the ceremonies. That's the kind of thing that the abbot is agreeing to. So after this talk, if Colin doesn't run away, then you'll have the good fortune to have somebody who has started that kind of a line. And then it's everyone's responsibility to then turn to the office of the abbot, not Colin as an individual person, although that's also important, but turning to the office of the abbot, the role of the abbot, the position of the abbot, the life of the abbot, as a way to keep the temple uh, vibrant and to bring about that quality that I saw in this tree in the sacred center of your shared practice. So in Japan, there's different ways that people refer to the abbot, and I think it's a kind of interesting thing to know about these different words to get a sense of what is this office of the abbot about. The most common term is jushoku, or sometimes when it's written, they'll use a slightly different character and they'll call it juji. And both of these are very practical names. So ju means to live, and shoku means to work, or ji means to hold. So usually the interpretation of this title for the abbot, the Jushoku, is just interpreted as the person who lives there and works, the person who takes care of the temple and resides there at the temple. In English, we oftentimes translate this as resident priest. And that, of course, is true. Who's going to be there day after day after day, ringing bells, opening things up, greeting people, seeing that Zazen continues, seeing that the daily sutras are read, seeing that the proper practices of a temple are upheld. That's what the resident priest does. And it's their responsibility on behalf of everyone to keep that going and to share it. And that's important. That's an important term. Their job there is not just to do it for everyone, But their job also isn't there to just try to force everybody else to do that. Their job is to practice diligently and then to share the merit of that practice and the actuality of that practice with everybody who's connected to the temple in some way. That's the central work. And then there's the administrative things and filing the paperwork and all that kind of stuff, probably wiping the floors and those kinds of things come in there too. But hopefully many of you are showing up to help with some of that kind of work. There's a second way, which is much less common. In fact, I only recently heard this word when I was visiting. I have one student who's been training at a temple named Shoboji that's in northern Japan. And when I went to visit him, one of the teaching staff there picked me up at the train station, and we were driving to Shoboji. And he got on the cell phone and he was asking the people back at the monastery in what room we should meet in and who was going to be included in that meeting, etc. And he kept referring to Sanshu sama, Sanshu sama, Sanshu sama, Sanshu sama. And San means mountain, but it also means three. And I had never heard the term before. So I was thinking we were going to go into this meeting. There was going to be like 3 or 4 priests, but I didn't know what the term is, why they were being called that. But actually, the Sanshu in this case means the Lord of the mountain, you could say. The san means mountain, shu means something like the person who is um, like the central being of that place. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about the mountain, and in this case at Shoboji, there's literally a literal mountain. But again, the mountain that we're talking about here is a spiritual mountain. It's like when we go inside the mountain gate, the world changes. It's not just this kind of world that we've reduced to our material sense of what things are, but it's a world that's alive. Everything you meet inside that gate is another being. And you spend time there, and then as you leave the gate, hopefully you remember everything that you meet is actually a living being. That's the purpose of the temple. Okay? So when we're talking about the mountain, again, not just the literal mountain, but a very special kind of a vivifying center of your spiritual practice. So that's what the Sanshu Samma is lord over. Now, there's another way that this term nushi gets used, though. The typical way, if you were to write it in a typical environment, would mean, like I say, Lord. But the time you hear it the most is when people are, say, walking through a forest, and maybe you come across a bear. Maybe some of you have had that experience before. Or like in our neighborhood here in the temple, there's this very curious ancient possum that is completely white and very big and very strange. And it comes out at these very interesting times and will kind of come to the center of the gardens, and they can't see when it's light out, I don't think. And even this one, if it could, I don't think it can see, and it will look around a bit and it will hobble back into the bushes, and you won't see them for a long, long time. When you see that, you know you've met the nushi. You met the spirit of the place. Like the spirit of the mountain will show themselves sometimes. And so when you say this term Sanshu, the Lord of the mountain, it's not just somebody who lords over things, but it's someone who is in touch with that spiritual fountainhead of the place that you are. In the ascending the mountain ceremonies, Koun will first go to the altar of the Buddha and make offerings and recite a greeting in a verse form and make prostrations. And then the very next place he'll go is to the Earth Spirit's altar. And at the Earth Spirit's altar, we'll do the same thing, make an offering and make a greeting in the form of a verse. So with this title, we can understand the job of the abbot or the office of the abbot as somebody who comes to know, comes to serve, comes to be served by the, 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 animating spirit of that particular temple and that particular place. A long time ago, when I was on a pilgrimage, and when I was in my 20s, and my pilgrimage partner and I came across this temple that was in the mountains, and it was a Shingon temple. This was a Shingon pilgrimage on Shikoku Island in Japan. And the abbot was very animated, really interesting guy, and he'd talk about all kinds of things all the time. We stayed there for a couple days. We took a couple days off because he was so engaging. And as he was showing us around the temple, he told us, he said, every mountain, whether there's a like physical, geographical mountain there or not, every mountain, every temple mountain is encircled by a naga or a dragon. And he said, if I don't keep up my practices correctly, and if I don't go to the necessary places on this mountain and make the correct offerings, the naga will go away. And then it is impossible for the Buddha to reveal himself on this mountain. Now, he's a Shingon priest, so I have a slightly different idea of what it means for the Buddha to reveal themselves than our school. So he meant that very literally. Like every day, he had to go to these various places on the mountain and do some special esoteric practices so that the Buddha's spirit could infuse the central icon in their main hall. I would say in our tradition that for the Zazen to be authentic, it is necessary that the Zazen is not located inside the bodies and minds of those people who are practicing Zazen in that place. If we think it's located inside or contained by my body and mind, then we don't really understand what that Zazen is about or what it's capable of doing through our lives. So this connection with the spiritual aliveness of being and of place, this becomes the real, job of the abbot. In addition to caring for everything, making sure it keeps going. Actually, those two things shouldn't be separate. They should be, the kind of same thing. And you need to rely on your abbot, whoever is in that line, to help cultivate that. The last way that Japanese people refer to, there's probably more ways, but the three I'm talking about today, last way I'll talk about today that people refer to the abbot is as the hojo. So the most common thing you'll hear if you're at a temple in Japan and someone's referring to the abbot, they will say hojo-san, hojo-san. So if you ever want to have a interesting experience, if there's a lot of monks around in a room, just say hojo-san and see who turns around. You probably get about half the people because so many people are used to being referred to by that name. When I became the abbot here, I was a little shy to do this, but I asked people to stop calling me Ejo and to start calling me Hojo-san. That's a hard thing to do. And that's why I resisted for a while. It took me maybe a year before I asked that. But the reason I asked was because I knew that it wasn't about me. And if I didn't become the Hojo-san, no other person could ever become the Hojo-san. No one can become Ejo. I'm just me. So when my successor comes, they're not going to call them Ejo, but they could call them Hojo. And so that's why I made the decision to start using Hojo-san as a title here. But aside from that, what I love about the title is it literally means like a Mr. 10 by 10, like 10 feet by 10 feet. And it comes from the Vimalakirti Sutra. And so when referred to the Hojo-san, you're referring to a room in the Zen temple, which is called the Hojo. And Hojo means 10 by 10 room, or just 10 by 10, a square 10. And in the Vimalakirti Sutra, some of you, I'm sure, have studied it. It's a great sutra. If you haven't read it before, I encourage you to read it. It's very lively. And in the sutra, the Buddha's explaining to his disciples that Vimalakirti, the great teacher, the layman Vimalakirti, is sick. And he's inviting his sutras to go pay them, his disciples to go pay them a visit. And they all decline. They're like, no, 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 no. And then they tell a story. They say, I ran into Vimalakirti somewhere and he really turned me inside out, basically. He showed him up. showed how their understanding was incorrect. And so everyone's hesitant to go. And then finally, Manjushri agrees to go. And so when he goes, then everybody, like it is, they're like, well, okay, we'll go. We'll go with Manjushri. As long as Manjushri is taking up the lead, that we'd all like to see what Vimalakirti has to say. So as Manjushri is going to visit Vimalakirti, all the people fall in behind him, and all these celestial beings hear about it, and they all join in. And pretty soon there's this huge retinue of 32,000 or more beings. Vimalakirti, knowing this is happening, uh, he transforms his little house into emptiness. He says, may this house be transformed into emptiness. And so when they arrive, all are able to enter the 10 by 10 hut, which is found out later by an envoy of Chinese diplomats who are the big boom of Buddhism in China, and they send an envoy to India to find the ruins of Vimalakirti's house, and they find what was reported to be his house, and they measure it, and it was 10 feet by 10 feet. I forget the Chinese measurement, but it comes out to 10 feet by 10 feet. So that's what we refer to as the abbot's quarters, the 10 by 10, the 10 by 10 room. And Vimalakirti has the capacity to transform this room into emptiness. That's the thing that is important about the story. Mr. 10 by 10 or Hojo-san, you make up your decisions as a community, what you like to call Koun after this is over. But it's their job to care for that room. You know, where is that room? There may be a physical room or not at your temple. I'm sitting in the Hojo at our temple. It's 8 by 12, by the way, so pretty close. But we can also understand that this room is not just a physical room, but it's the room of our intimate being. It's a chamber of our heart, of our consciousness. And it is that which Vimalakirti can transform into emptiness. And he can show even the emptiness of emptiness. And that's the reason that all of those beings can be there, because emptiness doesn't mean nothingness. Emptiness means that fullness of the total assembly. And this is the kind of magic which an abbot performs, knowingly or not, that their heart is transformed into, through emptiness again and again, so that there is room for the whole world to come through this teeny tiny room or this teeny tiny temple, and that the abbot can receive all of the people who come, and as Vimalakirti did, can mess with them a little bit, hopefully lovingly. But that's how Vimalakirti's emptiness works, is even though it could just be a great kindness, it shows up as a way that disturbs our sort of stale way of thinking about our lives. And then we're invigorated through that. So I would encourage you, as you're coming across coming towards these ceremonies, that you just give a little thought about that role of the abbot and how you regard that within your temple. Okay, I talked longer than I thought I would, but that always happens.